Clarence Thomas. This is an amazing story. It's the lead story over at HartmannReport.com this morning. It's titled, "Democrats Must Demand Justice Thomas Resign and His Wife is Prosecuted." And my whole point is that this has happened before. And there's like this giant, it's fallen into a giant memory hole. Back in 1968, I remember these. They were called the Fortis Film Festivals. They were happening around the country. Yale University famously did one. I believe there was one at MSU. I didn't show up, so I can't say for certain, but I believe there was. This started in '68 when, in June of 1968, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Earl Warren, the court was liberal at that time. It had a liberal majority. And the Chief Justice, Earl Warren, a liberal who had been appointed by Dwight Eisenhower, actually, Earl Warren decided that he was going to resign in June of '68 because the elections were in November of that year and the next president would come in January of '69, and he wanted to make sure that Lyndon Johnson would have a full 6 months to get a replacement for him on the court. So Congress then, the Senate, had to do two things. Number one, they had to move a new person into the Chief Justice position, and number two, they had to find somebody to replace Earl Warren in what would not be the Chief Justice seat, but in that now empty seat. So the proposal that Lyndon Johnson made, that President Johnson made, was that Abe Fortas, the only Jewish member of the court, become the Chief Justice. And that a guy by the name of Homer Thornberry, who you've never heard of because he never made it to the court, would be the guy who would fill the empty seat. Well, Republicans, in particular the Nixon campaign, keep in mind, Richard Nixon at this time was campaigning for president. He was the Republican nominee. Republicans went nuts. And they started, they dug through all this stuff and found that Abe Fortas, Supreme Court Justice, had taken a $15,000 speaking fee for speaking to a university group. Now, this is, by the way, not uncommon. In fact, Clarence Thomas has taken a $15,000 speaking fee. But this was the basis of their attack. They just went nuts throughout 1968. And finally, toward the end of the year, Abe Fortas said, okay, screw it. It's not worth the effort. I don't want to be Chief Justice. And so LBJ said to Earl Warren, can you stay on the court for a while? And then when Nixon came in January the following year, he said, can you stay on the court for a while? And so Earl Warren stayed on the court until June of '69. But that's just the beginning of the story. This is where it gets really wild. So Fortas is not on the court. And by the way, Fortas didn't say, I'm not going to do this until September. The election was in October. He backed away. And the election was in November. So, you know, Lyndon Johnson never got to put his own pick on the court. It was just, it was sort of like Merrick Garland. So when Nixon came in '69, there was an empty seat, and the Chief Justiceship was going to be empty when Earl Warren left. So when Nixon came in, what he did was he had John Mitchell, who had been his campaign manager and had been trashing Abe Fortas, he had John Mitchell launch a Justice Department investigation into Abe Fortas's wife. Because there had been allegations back when when Johnson first, proposed Fortas for the Supreme Court Chief Justice position, there were allegations from right-wingers that there was a secret document in his wife's safe that showed that she was involved in tax evasion. Well, there was no such secret document. Nobody had ever produced a shred of proof about this. This was just a charge that was leveled by the Nixon campaign against Abe Fortas and against the Democrats. But the Attorney General of the United States, John Mitchell, had one of his top lawyers, a guy by the name of William Rehnquist, prepared to convene a grand jury to prosecute Abe Fortas's wife. And at that point, Fortas, looking at the possibility of spending years and hundreds of thousands of dollars defending himself and his wife, a grand jury, after all, can indict a ham sandwich, just said, screw it, I'm out of here, I'm going to resign from the Supreme Court. So Nixon now has 2 seats to replace, Fortas and Warren. So what I'm saying is Why don't Democrats do the same? Launch, have Merrick Garland launch an investigation into Ginny Thomas. It certainly appears that she engaged in seditious conspiracy. We're seeing these clips all over the place. Launch an investigation, the Justice Department and Congress launch an investigation into Ginny Thomas, just like they did back in '69, and start putting pressure on Clarence Thomas to resign from the Supreme Court. He has behaved, Ginny Thomas didn't, the other thing that Abe Fortas did is he took $20,000 as a honorarium, essentially a kind of a salary for being on the board of a nonprofit foundation. Well, Ginny Thomas has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps over $1 million, from nonprofit foundations, like Heritage and groups like that. So it seems to me like what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and the Democrats should get all over this. Instead, they're calling for Thomas to just to recuse himself on issues having to do with January 6th. Come on. Can you spell weak need? I mean, come on. Prosecute or begin the investigation preparatory to prosecution of Ginny Thomas and go after Clarence. Get this guy off the court like they took Abe Fortas down.